shall we? Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very glad to have you all here. I know that it is too early to start with the side event, but we are all glad to have you all here this morning for this session, which will be dedicated to talk about the residual contamination management. My name is Abdullah Al-Kasawna. I'm an advisor with the Standard and Operation Division or team at the GICHD. And I'm very honored to be with my colleague and panelists, starting with General Saxit Sanctionentra. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. The Director General of the Thailand Mine Action Center, TMAC. Celine Shen, Advisor on Explosive Ordnance Risk Education at GICHD, and Erkan Husenov, Advisor on Information Management Capacity Strengthening at the GICHD. Welcome, all of you. In today's session, we will start with an introduction of the residual contamination management, defining the purpose of the planning for residual contamination, and emphasizing on the importance of early planning for RCM. Then we will talk about Thailand program, and we will have an overview from the DG of TMAC about the program, about the effort, and we will talk also about the support that GICHD is providing to TMAC to develop their residual contamination management transition working paper, as we call it right now, because it's still a draft. And then Celine will discuss about the explosive ordnance risk education during the RCM, and the importance of maintaining ERE efforts and the community engagement throughout the process. Also, information management, as I always call it, the backbone of the Mine Action Program. We will highlight the strong need for information management system, for solid database, which will support the decision-making process even after the completion of the Mine Action Program and during the residual contamination management phase. Then we will have time for open discussions and question and answers. Let me start with the residual contamination management definitions, and I'm sure that it's not new for all of you. These are the definitions as outlined in the UNMAS, starting with the residual contamination, which refers to contamination which gives the rise to residual risk. And from that definition, we need to define the residual risk. What is the residual risk? Which is the risk remaining following the application of all reasonable effort to identify, define, and remove all presence and suspicion of explosive ordnance through the non-technical survey, technical survey, and or clearance, which is the same definition of the land release, actually. So this definition taken from the UNMAS, but it is very important for any country, for any mine action program, to define this residual contamination, to contextualize the definition based on the context, based on the need, based on the threat, and based also on the definition of all reasonable effort. As you see, we highlight the all reasonable effort, so it is important, again, to define all reasonable effort for each country, because it will be the turning point when we say that, okay, now we complete our obligation, we fulfill our obligation, and we need to move to the residual contamination management phase. And based on that, based on the definition, and as you all know, we talk about risk mitigation, mitigation process, and risk treatment process. And if we define well the all reasonable effort, if we know when we are moving to the residual contamination management, this means that the risk is already treated, and we need to leave a window for residual risk, which is a natural thing in any mine action program, that we cannot give like 100% guarantee of full clearance of the area because of different factors. So we need to leave at least a small window for residual risk. So after the risk has been treated, and with the definition of all reasonable efforts and the application also of all reasonable efforts, we can say that all mines, all cluster munition have been cleared. The risk is decreased to a level that leaves us with residual contamination. For example, deep buried bump below the clearance depth that might remain, or scattered ERW that might remain under the depth of the clearance that is defined by the National Mine Action Standards or by the tasking order. So this residual contamination poses a residual risk only when three associated factors are combined. An explosive hazard must be present at a location when an activity capable of interacting with the hazard is taking place or will take place at some point in the future. In the risk diagram, as you can see on the slide, real risk only arises in the central red zone of the diagram. And the countries should use standardized instruments to analyze risk related to residual contamination and to evaluate whether it is tolerable or not. A risk level is tolerable whenever residual contamination is capable of interacting with a particular human activity. However, often we will face perceived risks outside of the red zone. Risk analysis and evaluation on considering what activity is planned, where and what the likelihood of explosive ordnance items helps us to understand whether a real risk exists and whether it is tolerable or not. Even when a real residual risk is tolerable or when it is only perceived, we may still implement certain measures that help to raise the confidence of affected people that land is safe to be used. And here we will talk about the program life cycle for any mine action. And this is the typical situation, the typical program life cycle that has phases starting with the conflict and during the conflict. And we have some examples right now that during the conflict we have mine action program ongoing during the conflict, then the stability and the reconstruction phase. And we all know that during that phase we have efforts, we have fund, we have international support, we have international interests, and all of these efforts, including the INGO existing country, will support to increase the ownership, the national ownership of the mine action program that will naturally lead to the reactive phase. So we are talking about two main phases: the proactive, when we have everyone in country supporting the country to increase the capacity, to enhance the capacity, to build the capacity starting from the beginning, if we are talking about the conflict phase. And this will increase the ownership, this will enhance the country capacity to stand alone at some point during the residual contamination management, because we all know that fund will degraded at some point, that we will have lack of funding for some countries, especially if we are talking about a long period. So we need to enhance the country capacity, to empower the country to be able to stand alone and to support the needs after the fulfillment of its obligation to the fulfillment of its obligation to the convention. And the early planning and preparation, it is very important, as we mentioned. So the planning, and this is according to UNMAS, should start as soon as the program become matures and as soon as the assets are available. And from our experience as GICHD working with Thailand, Thailand is approaching to the completion, to the fulfillment of its obligation. The deadline is end of December 2026. But thankfully, TMAC, they start the early planning for the residual contamination management. We've been working with them since 2021, and we're still working with them to develop the residual contamination management. At some point, you will say that 4 years is too long, but when you enter the process, you will realize that it needs this long time because it's not only TMAC or the National Mine Action Authority responsibility to respond to the residual contamination management, but it needs lots of efforts from different ministries, from different entities, from different authorities that was not at some point really involved in the mine action program during the proactive phase. So it is a very long process and it needs lots of preparation. So early planning means that we can reach to the point, to the turning point between proactive and reactive, we can reach to that point safely. So planning for the development of residual contamination management, the early planning will require appropriate institutional architecture. And this is a very simple question. Who will be managing the residual contamination, who will be leading the residual contamination management? Is it the current capacity with TMAC? Is it the current capacity, the National Mine Action Authority, the National Mine Action Center, or after 5 years, this entity will need to be restructured or changed or merged with another ministry or department in the government. So we need to understand, or we need to start thinking and early planning for this turning point. And the very simple question that we raise in our discussion with TMAC, with the representative from different ministries and entities during the workshops that we had with TMAC. So what is the current situation? Who's managing the mine action contamination in the current situation? How you see it after 10 years and how you see it after 20 years. And believe me, you will see a huge difference between what exists right now and how it will look like after 20 years. So if you wait until the last minute, this plan definitely, I'm not saying that it will be failed, but at least it will have some issues and some gaps. So the early planning is very useful, very beneficial. The other point, the appropriate databases, data sets, tools, and systems. Very simple question that was raised also from our experience with TMAC. During the RCM, who will be responding to the call-outs? Who will be responding to the call from the community? We will receive calls the same way that we receive calls during the proactive phase, that someone find an item. Okay, now we have TMAC, we have their capacity, but in 10 years' time, who will be receiving this call? Does this person need a training? Does the first response team need specific type of training? If we are talking about the current example from Thailand, they have 2 hotlines, one for the emergency, one for the victims, and one for the police and the general type of response. So both can be merged to one hotline, or should we keep the separation? If we keep the separation, the hotline for the rescue team, for the civil defense team, does they need specific training or they are able to respond? So all of these questions needs a quick answer and needs an early planning before we move to the residual contamination management and we find ourselves at some point we don't know how to manage, because as I mentioned at the beginning, that different entities and many entities will be involved in that process. Also, the clear responsibilities between those entities, between those ministries, between those government bodies, it needs to be clarified, and it needs to be clarified as soon as possible before moving to the residual contamination management. Because again, from the experience that we have, The first discussion that we have with people in Thailand, when we invite different ministries, some of them, they didn't realize why they are in the room. And they always refer to TMAC as the mine action entity who's responsible to manage the contamination in country. Maybe it is correct at the current circumstances, but after 10 years, it needs to be changed. And when we start discussing with them, when we start putting the scenarios in 10 years' time or 5 years' time, the understanding is changed between the representative from different ministries, and now, after more than 1 year of the discussion, we have all the same understanding that it is not the responsibility of only TMAC, but it is the responsibility, the national responsibility of different government bodies, entities, ministries, and now we have that good understanding from everyone. Also, the correct information to be collected, which my colleague Erkin will highlight better than I'll do. So we need to think about the information. We need to think about the information as a decision-making enabler tool, because without information management, we cannot take any decision. And for some reason, some people will think that, okay, we need this information management at the proactive phase, which will support the decision-making process, definitely. But after moving to the reactive phase, to the residual contamination management, do we still need this type of information management? Yes, no question, definitely yes. We need to have this information. Maybe we need to maintain a solid, sustainable information management system that can support even after moving to residual contamination and can support the decision-making process after 10 years, 20 years. And we need to think also about who needs access to this database. Because in the current situation, we have TMAC, we have the National Mine Action Authority, who's managing the data. But after 20 years, if we are talking about the long-term monitoring, we should have access to different entities, especially when we are talking later about the change of the land use. So we agreed on the early planning. We agreed on the need to plan as soon as possible. What if we have some delays in the plan? Do we have any risk? Definitely we will have risk of increased the risk to communities. So if we leave the community in the turning or in the transition period between the proactive and the reactive, who they will be communicated to report the explosive ordnance? Who will take the responsibility in dealing with these new findings? So if we don't have proper plan for that, definitely the people, the communities will be at risk at some point. The loss of institutional knowledge. Again, taking the example of Thailand, 25 years or more of working hard to clean and clear the contamination in country. Lots of experience, huge lesson learned from the experience that they have. The people, personnel who are working, the tools, the instruments that they have. If we don't plan for the next step, definitely we will lose this capacity. And imagine that a country like Thailand should start or may start from scratch to develop this capacity. It will be a huge effort, it will be a huge cost. So we need to maintain, we need to keep what we have now in hand, and we need to maintain and we need to think how we can use the current capacity in the future during the residual contamination management phase. And again, the lack of budget and resources. We will not have enough budget as we have in the proactive, as we saw in the life of the mine action program, that the interest of donor will not remain the same after moving to the residual contamination. If you build your capacity from scratch, definitely it will be a huge budget and it will be a huge loss of resources. Inadequate data to proper decision-making process, and again, this is something that we will highlight later, the need for solid, sustainable information management system. If we lose this information definitely the response will be affected and people will be at risk again. Uncoordinated response, especially in case of accident and incident. And again, I'll give the example from Thailand. We have people from the rescue team, we have people from the air ambulance team who attend that meeting and who usually respond to any accident or incident happen in country. Give an example that the accident caused by explosive ordnance. So if that accident happened, who will respond? The people who will respond, if we define at some point the people who will be responding to the accident, do they need specific training? Are they able to enter to any previously contaminated area? Or they need some type of training, they need some type of referral to TMAC or to the equivalent body during the residual contamination management. And the challenge in the continuity of the risk education, which will be highlighted by Celine. So we still need risk education to educate and to give awareness to targeted audience during the residual contamination management. So we need to maintain this capacity and we need to have the experience, utilize the experience that we have during the proactive, utilized correctly during the reactive phase. And the gap in the legal framework, which is a big challenge. And it is a big challenge for Thailand right now because, again, it needs the synergy of different ministries to have proper laws that will support the residual contamination management. We will touch that later, but think about the current laws. Think about the current National Mine Action Standard. Is it the same that should be used during the residual contamination management, or it needs to be changed, adjusted, add new normative frameworks? So all of these legal perspectives will take time. And again, since it is not the responsibility of TMAC, it needs connection with other ministries. It will be a slow process. Maybe it will go to the parliament. Maybe for Thailand, it needs the signature from the king himself. So this process will take a long time. So you need to take that in consideration and you need to plan for that as soon as possible. Thanks to the SAMREAP meeting, the 5th review meeting, who added an action point specifically to establish the sustainable national capacity to be able to respond to the residual contamination management. So this action point is added to this SAMREAP action point, which is really great and which is a good indicator to National Mine Action Authority about the need to start the planning process for the residual contamination management. I'll pause here and I'll give the floor to the General Director to give us an overview about the National Mine Action Program in Thailand. Please.
Thank you, Abdullah. Good morning once again. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants. My name is General Saksit Sangchanintra. I'm the Director General of Thailand Mine Action Center. First of all, allow me to thank the GICHD for your cordial partnership and the important support you have extended to Thailand Mine Action Center, specifically for organizing this timely and very important site event concerning the residual contamination management. Why I mentioned about the importance of this site event, because at the end of the day, all state parties have to finish the mandate according to the convention that you have to clear the landmine, every landmine and in the land. And I also would like to thank Mr. Abdullah and your distinguished team for their relentless effort and contribution on the RCM process in Thailand that you mentioned a lot about my country. Thank you so much. I'm very honored and privileged to have the opportunity to introduce to you the information concerning the TMAC. I have a few slides preparing for you for quick and clear understanding about the humanitarian mine action paradigm of TMAC. As you see on the screen, we signed the Ottawa Convention on the 3rd of December 1997, and the ratification is action on 27th of November 1998. And the mandate effect to Thailand on the 1st of May 1999, which is almost 26 years. Thailand on the mission. These slides, it's try to summarize the paradigm that I mentioned 26 years. On your right-hand side, 1999, once we ratified by the convention, we identified the contaminated area in Thailand is around 2,500 square kilometers. 10 years, according to the mandate, we cannot finish for the whole contaminated area. Therefore, Thailand requests for the first extension. At that period of time, I mean on the year 2009, from 2,500 square kilometers, we down to 528 square kilometers. Another 9.5 years, we cannot fulfill the goal. Therefore, we request for the second extension, again, on the year 2018. At that time, we still have the contaminated area left from 500 square kilometers to almost 400 square kilometers. We cannot finish again. Therefore, we asked to request for the third extension, which is the current situation of Thailand. We received the third extension request on the year 2023. At that time, we have the contaminated area left around 22 square kilometers. As Abdullah mentioned, we still have the time left is around no more than 1.5 years. And the third extension will last on December of 2026. A lot of challenge. At this time, I think roughly the number of the contaminated area left in my country is around 15 square kilometers. This is the paradigm almost 26 years of humanitarian mine action in Thailand. Okay, on your right-hand side is the map of Thailand. The green color means the land that we released already, and the red one represents the current contaminated area is left around 15 square kilometers. And it covers 6 provinces in Thailand. Okay, I don't touch any again because Abdullah already explained about this. We will go back once we have a Q&A or discussion later. Right. That's it for me.
Yeah. Thank you very much, General Director. And thank you very much, General Director, for this overview. And it's very interesting to understand from the Director about the 15 square kilometer that's still left. And for some reasons, it might not be achieved during this period of time because of different factors. Some of them, the area is not accessible. So should Thailand wait until fulfillment of all obligation to the convention, until Thailand clear and release the whole country to start the residual contamination management? Or what about the countries, the provinces that already cleared and already completed its obligation. As the director mentioned, it is still 6 provinces that's still contaminated. What about the rest of contamination? So should we talk about different approach? Should we talk about province by province approach, which is, again, it might be yes, it might be no, but through our discussion with Thailand and through our recent discussion in Pitchapun, which is one of the provinces that has completed its obligation, and it's applying the residual contamination management to some extent right now. So we find that province by province approach is the best approach for Thailand case. And it may be applicable for other countries that have the same circumstances of areas that cannot be cleared at the current circumstances. So we, together with TMAC, we adopt this approach to go for province by province approach and to implement the residual contamination management in the provinces that already completed. Pitchapun is one of these provinces, and it's one of these examples, which we believe there is a need to coordinate the effort of the response available right now under a framework which is the Residual Contamination Transition Plan. So the advantages for this province by province that we can support or pilot the plan that we are developing right now with Thailand. We can pilot this plan in these provinces, or we can test this plan. We can test the coordination mechanism between different entities in this plan, in this province. And this will enable us to gradual adjustment of the plan, of the coordination mechanism if needed. And then we can ensure the transition to residual contamination remains manageable in the other provinces and in the entire country. This will also help us to provide a clear guidance on managing the residual contamination after the country fulfill its obligation. I mean, after the entire country fulfill its obligation. So province by province approach from our perspective and from our discussion should be the best approach at the current circumstances with Thailand. 3 main processes that is discussed that will be triggered the residual contamination management if we find a new explosive ordnance in previously cleared area or unknown previously contaminated area. This will start the residual contamination coordination mechanism. And in the management of land use, which is one of the most difficult thing for the long-term monitoring, and which needs also different entities and ministries and departments. For example, in Thailand, it needs the Department of Land and Agriculture to be involved in that, which is, again, it's not the responsibility of TMAC alone. It is the responsibility of other departments. And in case of an accident happen, an accident caused by explosive ordnance, this will also trigger the residual contamination management, and we need to understand the coordination mechanism, and we need to understand the required support from different ministries or entities. I was planning to have a Slido to think together about the topic that comes to your mind at the beginning when we discuss the residual contamination management, but I see that we are a bit late of time and for technical issues to have the other screen, so I'll skip that point if you don't mind, but we need all to think together what should be added to the residual contamination transition plan, and I'm suggesting some of these titles. The first thing we need to understand and will define the all reasonable effort, because again, it is the turning point from being proactive to responding reactively to EO found or an accident or the change of land use. So the country needs to will define the all reasonable effort, and we need to have that in the plan. The long-term monitoring of previously contaminated area, especially when we are talking about the land use, There is space, please. If you want to join us, there is space. So the long-term monitoring needs to be also coordinated. We need to think about who will be responsible, especially when we are talking about the change in the land use. So the land that was cleared to be an agriculture, to be used as an agriculture area, it's not the same that the land that will be used for infrastructure in the future. So we need to have proper risk assessment to understand if any action is required during the residual contamination management. So this is something that we need to think about. And the management of incident, accident, new EO found, the coordination mechanism between all entities needs to be also well defined in the plan. And the risk management, the information management, the quality management, also it's an important title that needs to be added to the plan. And the legal framework, the normative, the standards, the SOPs needs also to be added. What needs to be changed, what needs to be adjusted. And the required resources, the required budget. So all of these tools, instruments, all of these things needs to be added to the plan, and we need to think about that during the planning phase. This is an example from Thailand. It's still a draft. This is what we call now transition working paper. It is still a draft. We suggest some titled. We discussed some titled with Thailand. This is a snapshot of the titles added to this draft. Again, it's still a draft. It might be adjusted in the coming weeks because we are finalizing this. And again, the most difficult part for us was the rules and responsibilities for different entities and ministries. This draft will go for senior department, for senior ministry entities to be revised and to be validated. Again, I'll pause here and I'll give the floor to my colleague Celine, who will talk about the explosive ordnance risk education during the RCM. Please, Celine.
So thank you, Abdullah, and thank you, General Secretary, for your interesting and insightful overview of residual contamination management as a concept in mine action, as well as the practical realities in the context of Thailand. When we speak about residual contamination management, we often speak about it from a land release perspective. So I'm really excited to be here today to speak about it from my favorite topic, explosive ordnance risk education. And some of the presentations that I will be making today is taken from this publication that was published by the GICHD very recently in December 2023. You can download the publication from our website, and I've left a few hard copies in this room as well as in the general conference area. So I hope that you could read this publication if you're interested or if you're planning to transition to the residual contamination context, and it can provide you with some valuable advice. So today I'm going to focus specifically on 6 key considerations to transition EORE to a residual contamination context. And these 6 considerations is going to be including evaluating the specific need for EORE in the residual contamination context, framing EORE in residual contamination context, planning and implementing the transition plan for EORE, and then once we're in the residual contamination phase, how can we monitor and evaluate EORE, and how do we ensure capacities for EORE are maintained during the residual contamination phase? So starting off with understanding the specific needs of EORE in the residual contamination context, I'd like to ask everyone to imagine a country that has just reached the residual contamination phase. And in this country, there is an uninhabited area, but we know there is a residual threat in this uninhabited area. A few years down the line, in the same country, it's decided that there's going to be a change in the land use, and people are going to come back and inhabit this previously uninhabited area. Again, remember, we know that there is a residual threat, but this is not enough to understand who, why, and how should we deliver EORE. So it's really important when we think about understanding specific needs of EORE that we think about, first of all, what and where is the remaining contamination or residual threat. If the residual threat is, for example, 5 meters subsurface, this could have a huge impact for agricultural workers if these are the people who are going to come back and use the land. Or if the contamination is 30 meters subsurface, it might not have an impact for the agricultural workers, but it would definitely have an impact for construction workers if the residual land is going to be, if the previously uninhabited land is going to be used for a big urbanization project. So we need to understand what and where is the residual threat, and who will be the groups at risk, and what are the activities that are likely to interfere with this remaining contamination. And also, when would these groups be at risk? So when are all of these projects started? And it's important to ask these questions, the what, where, how, why, to ensure that we understand how to and to whom we should deliver EORE. Once we have an understanding of the specific EORE needs in a residual contamination context, we can then begin to frame the EORE component. And as my colleagues have already mentioned, in a residual contamination context, we can assume that international resources for EORE will be limited. So it is extremely important that in the residual contamination context, there is national ownership for EORE. I'd like to take the example from Thailand, if you don't mind, General, about the village chiefs. So it's my understanding that in the residual contamination context, village chiefs are being identified as potential messengers of EORE. And I think this is a really excellent example of national ownership and integration of EORE into the societal structure that will ensure sustainability of EORE. I think also, in addition to societal structure, we can think of EORE being integrated at governmental levels, for example, with the Ministry of Education. The importance of including EORE in legal and normative frameworks ensures sustainability, and it ensures that EORE will not be left out as a secondary good-to-have activity. Because in addition to having limited international resources, we also have to consider that in a residual contamination phase, EORE would likely be delivered on a reactive or needs basis. So as opposed to many proactive full-fledged mine action programs where you see systematic delivery of EORE next to land release, EORE will be done on a needs basis when the need is identified. And so ensuring EORE in legal and normative frameworks provides an obligation to provide EORE as well as sets a standard for the delivery of EORE in a residual contamination phase. And so my only addition for the village chiefs who will be delivering EORE is to ensure that their responsibility is highlighted in legal frameworks and that there are standards set so that they know how to deliver EORE. And I think that this will very much empower any messenger of EORE. I think this is also quite common in many European countries who are in a residual contamination state. We often have legal obligations to deliver safety briefings for construction workers, for example. Another important factor when we think about framing of the EORE component is the design of the EORE activities. Again, emphasizing potential limited resources for EORE, we need to think about how can we most effectively and efficiently deliver EORE in the residual contamination context. And here I would just like to use Switzerland as an example. In Switzerland, EORE is, explosive ordnance is most often reported during the peak hiking seasons when people are in mountainous areas that are also former training grounds of the Swiss Armed Forces. And so every season in spring, right before the peak hiking season in Switzerland, the Swiss Armed Forces uses mass media and social media to deliver EORE messages to potential hikers. They also have an application where hikers can download onto their phone and report presence of explosive ordnance if they find it during their leisurely activities. So this is an example of how EORE might be delivered in residual contamination contexts. We also have many other examples of EORE being delivered through mass media as well as specific interpersonal EORE for specific groups. Once we have all of the EORE integrated and planned and understood, we can include it into the transition plan. And here I just want to emphasize again what my colleagues have mentioned, the importance of starting early and the importance of making sure that EORE is considered right from the start of the planning process and not as a secondary afterthought. And again, using the example of Thailand in the province by province or phase by phase approach, I think this is a very practical approach. Personally, and I think it's also a very great approach to trial methodologies and to take the best practices and then apply it at a national level for a most effective and efficient outcome at the end. As in proactive or full-fledged mine action programs, monitoring and evaluation of EORE remains of utmost importance, although in a residual contamination context, monitoring and evaluation will probably look different from what we are used to monitoring and evaluating in proactive phases. So for example, in terms of monitoring in a residual contamination phase, the monitoring might focus more or should focus more on the circumstances that will trigger EORE. So at the very start of my presentation, we used the example of changes in land use that would trigger the need for EORE. It could also be the onset of a natural disaster such as earthquake, flooding, or landslide that could trigger the need for EORE with the potential movement of explosive ordnance from these disasters. In terms of EORE activities, in a proactive phase, we talk about monitoring and evaluating behavior change. But in a residual contamination phase, it could be that the basic output indicators is sufficient. Because in the residual contamination phase, we are focused on ensuring that the right people are protected from the threat of explosive ordnance. And so indicators that measure who received the explosive ordnance risk education, when did they receive it, why did they receive it, how they received it, and what were the key risk education messages shared may be sufficient in the residual contamination phase. And as with all humanitarian and development programs, ensuring the safeguarding of populations who receive risk education remains of the utmost importance in the residual contamination phase. And lastly, I wanted to mention about the capacities and resources, emphasizing again the importance of national ownership and identifying who is responsible for the overall EORE implementation of EORE in the residual contaminant phase. And it could be several bodies. Who will deliver the EORE is extremely important. And again, this could be several different entities. And who is going to be responsible for ensuring a standard and training on EORE, as well as how will we ensure that we have the relevant capacity and resources, including human and financial resources, to deliver EORE. And these are all important considerations that we have to think about before we can fully transition EORE into the residual contamination context. And from my end, I hope that this has given some interesting food for thought for everyone in this room. And I'm going to pass on now to my colleague, Erkin, who will talk about information management.
Thank you, Celine. Good morning. Thanks for being here, dear colleagues. I'm Erkin Husseinov, working as an information management advisor at GICHD. And before I start, I just wanted to ask, how many decisions we normally do in a daily basis. Who is driving a car? Who is bicycling? Have you ever counted any decisions you do in a minute, in an hour? Any guess?
A lot.
It's around 4, yeah? No?
A lot, I say.
Should be a lot,
Yeah.
depends. It's around 4 seconds. 4 seconds per decision when you are driving a car. If you have a good coffee, probably 3 seconds. If no coffee, maybe 5 seconds. But again, I'm not comparing driving a car or riding a bicycle, comparing with a proactive or reactive stage, but there is some similarities probably. But it's not about decisions, it's about information we use for decisions. It's not working. Oops.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. You drive.
I've put together just the terms and probably definition of information management and information management system together. Just to clarify, when we say that information management serves decisions, and if you are doing everyday decisions, it's about information we use. Normally when I go out, I'll just open the window to check the temperature, and without checking probably forecasting. It's enough for me. Maybe not enough in the springtime. Maybe I need to check the daily forecast. Should I need umbrella or not? That's about information, type of information I'm going to use. And the same in mine action programs. It's information management, it's about process, which includes data collection, quality review or verification, analysis, sharing and dissemination. But information management system is a backbone to support that processes. It could be a backbone of RCM as well. We like to be backbone of everything, I mean information management, but normally information management system, it's a backbone of the process. So in a reactive or proactive phase, it's same, the importance of this is the same, I would say. Even when the program moving to the residual contamination management stage, it must be even harder if they didn't start it earlier. When the mine action is active, when you have enough resources, when you have enough organizations, implementing organizations in the country, but when you are moving to RCM, so you will feel limitations, but you still might be needed to the, for modern system to support your decisions. Information management system needs to provide the facility to collect and distribute relevant information from the field to headquarters in a timely manner. But when the program shifting organizational roles and processes, what should be started first? I think it should be started from national mine action standards, information management SOPs, guidelines, etc. Then the purpose and strategic focus also is different. The information management system probably we're supporting when you have an active mine action program. It might be shifted to the little bit different. It might be shifted to the reactive activities like EOD callouts, post-clearance surveys. But again, the system will be the same. It could be just limited with the number of users. It might be even cheaper if it's managed properly during the active stage. But focus might be a little bit different. Probably you will be collecting less data, but sharing more information to different ministries and agencies for better planning. Complexity and architecture, again, if it depends on the system you implement in the active phase, in a proactive phase, you might have quite latest modern system which would be continued to use in reactive phase easily. The system just should be very flexible to be adjusted to the new challenges, new goals, but in the end, it might be cheaper to use when you adjust the automatization, considering the rapid development of technology, AI tools, machine learning, etc. It could be even maintained easily. Type of the data, I've already mentioned that probably data collection and activities might be different, but again, it's the same data for the system. It's the same cell of the information which is coming and going out from the system. Data interoperability. Here is a little bit tricky because when the program is in proactive phase, you'll be thinking more about IMSS, minimum data requirements, making visualization the same, different, depends. But when the program in reactive phase, you must be thinking in a way around to make terms easy to understand for others. We normally understand each other by naming terms, technical survey, targeted technical survey, systematic, etc. But not every ministry and other agencies understand those terms. When you're sharing the data in reactive phase, it should be simple, easy to understand. When the system is integrated, it should be easily to be integrated and easily understood. It's not working.
Yeah,
Not working. Easily understood for other agencies and ministries. Centralized and standardized IAM system, it's also important. But again, here also we should understand that centralized and standardized system in a proactive phase, it's essential, and in reactive phase as well, but we must think a little bit more about decentralization as well in terms of data dissemination. Because when the programs decide to move to on province by province approach or community approach, it should be the data, mine action data, should be disseminated properly to the communities and district authorities because they normally manage the assets. They normally know which land could be changed to the different type of the use, etc. They should understand the whole legacy and history of the spot of the land to react properly. So the key features to consider is offline and online data collection, probably more crowdsourcing, because you will have less classic teams working in the field, reporting nice reports, submitting reports, coming into the centralized database. But in your active phase, you might have less people, but you might need still information from the field. It could be crowdsourcing components in your system, which is easy to adjust with the newest IAM systems now. Of course, relational database management systems, role-based access control, and protect sensitive information, especially about victims, names, locations. Data validation and quality control mechanism, it's easier, I would say, when you are in the proactive phase. It's a little bit harder than when you're collecting the information from communities or from social media or crowdsourcing. You have to think about more automatization of the data quality because you might have thousands and thousands data coming in, and someone or any tool should be checking those information in your system. Regular automatic backups, it's, I would say, essential for reactive and proactive phase. And I've already mentioned about regional access at community level. It's about sharing the data with different ministries and agencies to use the information in their daily activities when in development projects and in a planning. I'm sitting a little bit far, that's why it's taking a little bit time for me to switch the slides.
Should I?
No, it's okay. Just if you open the, that controller, good. So system collaboration and integration with national spatial data infrastructure. Normally it's a land management and geodesy agency in the country. And the information management system should be designed and developed in that mode to be able to be integrated in the future with the other national spatial data infrastructure. Most of the country, almost all countries, I've seen very beautiful, very nice national spatial data infrastructure. But there is no any legal frameworks or decisions to integrate such a nice data sets together for better decisions, or at least to deploy in the future any nice and beautiful AI tools for the moment. You can see, you can open the website even of the small cafe shop, and you will see a chatbot. It's AI. It's asking you what do you want, what type of the coffee you want if you're checking it. And we should expect that it will be integrated with AI tools in the future as well. So for that one, we need a centralized, open source, quite robust, modern system to retain that knowledge. And finally, in the end, I would like to mention about IMSMA, IMSMA NG, IMSMA Legacy, and IMSMA Core. Those products normally supported by GICHD and our partners. And for the moment, we have around 30 countries moving to the IMSMA Core, and other 30 countries still using IMSMA NG, probably a few countries still in IMSMA Legacy, and some other nice information management systems they use in the country. Thanks for your attention. We are ready for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. And we talk a lot, and now it's your turn for questions, comments, feedback, and please.
Thank you very much to the panel for a very interesting presentation, particularly TMAC. I don't know a lot about the program, so I was very grateful to learn a little bit. Good morning to everybody else. I'm not sure if I have a question or a comment or both, so you can interpret it, could go to the floor. When we think about residual contamination, we're talking in some countries of contamination from 100 years ago, and we should always consider the victims of those potential incidents, and to see them as potentially a victim of a long past conflict as well. So I'm very interested to understand in the planning, and you mentioned it as an equation, are victims considered part of the equation, and what procedures or laws could be put in place to ensure that they are compensated for incidents, that they receive medical care, rehabilitation care, livelihood support, these types of things that we address so clearly during the proactive phase, and in particular laws protecting them. And I do know some countries, or many countries now, that have classify victims of landmines or UXO as war victims, and they receive a state pension, for instance, if they're permanently disabled or something. So that's my question or comment. I'm not sure which.
Thank you very much. Anyone would like to take it, or I take it?
I'm not sure that I can respond to your question in general. But in Thailand, we always focus on the person who victimized from various kind of mine. After we start to run the project with the GICHD about the RCM, we also concerned about the point that you just mentioned as well. Specifically the classification of the victim, which is the effect on the liability and the legal matters. Because if the victim does not under the qualification or they missed on the classification that Thailand need to emphasize in specific case of victim, that will be a problem. I will jot down this one, and I will move forward on the concerned authority in Thailand. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment, question. I'll start with Steve, then JC, then here, and then there. Steve, please.
Yeah, thank you. And again, thank you for the panel. It's personally quite rewarding. As I'm looking around the room, for those of you who don't know, Rob White, who's with MPA now, kind of started this whole thinking. So I guess Rob is the grandfather of this process to see this happen. So thank you very much for that. I do use the word grandfather, obviously meaningful in this. And it's actually a response to Ruben. I think one of the things that struck me as I've been involved in RCM is that, as Ruben said, this is a 100-year problem. And so I think when we're looking at RCM processes, you know, you keep on talking about 10, 20 years, but as Ruben said, it's not, it's 100 years. And so the processes and the technology, for example, the databases, you know, what is a database going to look like in 100 years' time? So I think the RCM process, although we talk about residual contamination, it seems quite sedentary. The actual RCM process needs to be quite dynamic because it's going to be with us for our into our grandchildren, going back to Rob. Our grandchildren and great-grandchildren are going to still be dealing with weapons from that are there, you know, that are being dropped now, or in cases like looking at Eunice from Palau. Her country is dealing with weapons from 60, 70 years ago. 80 years ago. So, you know, so I think that this dynamicism that Ruben's kind of hinted to is something that needs to be considered, and it's, I think, a very interesting part of this. Over.
Yes, I totally agree. And adding to this point, the point that I mentioned about the synergies between different entities in country, the early planning for this synergy, because again, it's not TMAC responsibilities alone. Even after 20 years, we might have a different structure for TMAC. So this is the need to bring other ministries to the discussion, and this is what we did actually in Thailand. That we brought the Ministry of Health, and they were from the early steps and the discussion, the Ministry of Social Affairs and other relevant ministries and entities, they were with us from the early steps. I'll take, I see your hand, Lionel. I'll take, or to this point, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is also the case of a country that switched to a reactive phase, Jordan.
Yes.
And actually within the National Commission for Demining and Rehabilitation, the main remaining program, I think it's on victim assistance.
Correct.
That's one thing. The other thing is that we say that maybe in the long term, you respond to specific needs of persons. It's also about national level, how you take care about people with specific needs in general. For example, here I would refer to France, where actually we still have accidents from explosive remnants of war from World War II, and sometimes even the Franco-Prussian War from the 19th century. The thing that there is no triage between victims of explosive ordnance and victims of other accidents. That's national system that allow you to enter to the hospital and to receive immediate care, etc., etc. So I think that's also something to think about, like whether it needs to be specific in the long run or it needs to be integrated in a wider national social health policies and structures.
Thank you, Lionel. Juan Carlos?
Thank you. Thank you so much to the panelists. Just one concern that I have is looking at the proactive and reactive phase as it's set in time. I think they overlap. And so I think that it's important to start looking at proactive and reactive together instead of in separate phases, you know, because a lot of states, you already know where the residual contamination will be. Every case is different, but in a war such as in Angola, it's going to be everywhere. So you know where you have residual. So no need to wait until a specific phase to move in. That's my perspective, to move into some transitional capacity. We've seen a lot of states, parties to the convention, finalize Article 5 and had not established that Article 5, that residual capacity. So now they're starting to, again, set up a structure. So I think we need to look at proactive and reactive at the beginning, and not wait till not look at it in phases. I heard a lot of transition, but it should all be in place at the very beginning. The other thing, and Ruben, that's a great question as well. I think that all the states parties, or most of them, I think only 2, that have victim assistance obligations are also party to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. His Royal Highness Prince Mirad, which you know, many of you know, in Jordan, he's the head of the Higher Council with Disabilities. So it's important that victim assistance, you know, we don't try to take it on. We take on a piece of victim assistance, but it really does need to move over to the Ministry of Health and Social Welfare as soon as possible, because those are the entities that have the long road ahead for support to persons with disabilities. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Please go on.
Hi, I'm Quan, UNDP Vietnam. Thank you for your presentation. Actually, Vietnam still have 5.6 million hectare of contamination with explosive ordnance, and projected they used to be 150 years, but now they ambitious goal to clear all landmine or UXO by 2060. So actually, the GICHD and VMAC, our national authority, conducted pilot RCM, long-term risk management survey in Guangxi province, and since then, some progress has been made, such as a new mine action ordinance was drafted, and risk management standard added to national mine action standard, and URI strategy, which employs some whole of government approach to fill the gap to reach out to remote area. So, and then in smart core transition too. So this progress has been made. So my question to our General Director, Timek, when did you actually start considering this residual contamination management in your span of your project? Thank you.
That's a very difficult question. I can answer on behalf of the government. And I think one of the most significant factors so as to run the RCM process is time. Time is needed. It's needed for restructuring. It's needed for verifying various kind of authorization. As we already mentioned quite often during our presentation, because we have the different entities. Different entities mean different jurisdiction, different authorization. Therefore, we need time to make clear understanding and support from all concerned stakeholders, not only stakeholders, but also locals, because it's concerned about utilizing the released land. Once you release the land and the people, they go into the land and use, that's the most part of difficulty, that you have to make them understand what the residual threat, as the Celine mentioned on the slide. This is my answer to your question. Right.
Thank you, General. The last question, please.
Yep. Thank you. My name is Sarah. I'm from the Cambodian Mines and Authority in Cambodia. I just want to understand, and so that's why I have a few questions. So question one, I just want to understand the GICHD and TMAP perspective on the liability, how you define the liability in the residual phase. The first question. And the second question, just want to know how the GICHD help the national authority to improve the data collection on the ground to support the residual stage. The third question, I have seen the previous slide regarding the province by province approach. So interesting. So I just want to understand how it will take to conduct the piloting of processing structure and responsibility. Thank you.
So I'll start from the last question, and thank you for these very interesting points. One of them is a minefield for me, actually, which is the liability. But the last question, the pilot phase, will start soon after the transition working paper is validated. We will start testing this in Phetchabun province in specific, because as I said, it's already on the residual contamination management phase. They are applying a kind of residual contamination, so it will be easy for Thailand, for TMAC, to apply this plan in Phetchabun. And based on this experience, we will, together with TMAC, we will either adjust or keep the plan as it is, subject to the results that we will have from Phetchabun province. For the liability one, it is a very difficult thing. You know, when we are talking about liability, it's not easy. Also, it needs like normative frameworks, laws, and other things. Our colleague who's sitting in the back, Kinda, is working on the liability from GICHD side. She, together with some other colleagues, she conducted a liability workshop in the Southeast Asia, which is linked to some extent to the residual contamination management that we are providing right now to TMAC. So we have that discussion, but maybe the next NDM or the next meeting when we see each other, we can provide more information about the link between RCM and the liability, because again, it is not an easy thing, and it is not only the Mine Action Authority decision to say that, okay, you are liable or we are liable. The last point about the information management, I'm very conscious about the time because we already passed our time. Maybe you can discuss separately with Erkin. And again, thank you all. Thanks for the panelists. Thanks for the great contribution. And thank you all for being here. We are glad to have you all here. And to have this discussion, and we will remain available during the day or even after the end of the NDM to keep this discussion ongoing, to keep this discussion alive, because all of your valuable contribution will support us and TMAC in the development of the transition working paper and in the piloting of the transition working paper in Thailand. And if we succeed, and hopefully we will succeed together with TMAC support in this pilot, this could be applied in other countries, and the pilot, the experience can be also utilized from other national mine action authority. Again, thank you very much. Thanks, Director General, for being here and for your contribution. Thank you, Celine. Thank you, Erkin. And have a great day. Thank you.